There may be no plan for life after Brexit, but there is now a plan to set up a unit to draw up a plan. The Prime Minister announced yesterday that the best and brightest civil servants would be brought together to do what it seems no one up till now has done, work out what our new relationship with the EU will be. We'll speak in a moment to Lord Gus O'Donnell, former Cabinet Secretary. First, though, Professor Sionaidh Douglas-Scott is a constitutional law expert at Queen Mary's University in London. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
It will need the brightest and the best because this is one hell of a job, isn't it?
Indeed. The constitutional implications of this are huge, and actually they are quite troubling. And that's even if we leave the devolution aspects of this aside.
Troubling in what way?
The whole process of the domestic disentanglement of the UK from EU law is going to be an absolutely massive, massive project. Not only do we have to repeal the European Communities Act, but in addition to that, EU law has entered national law in so many ways, into acts of parliament, but also into statutory instruments.
So is the fear that if you remove the EU element of it, there will be gaps? There will be gaps that could be playing through the courts for years?
Exactly, yes, because a lot of EU law is what is known as directly effective. It doesn't need national legislation. So if we withdraw from the treaties, that means that there are whole areas of our law currently governed by the EU which will have lacuna, they will have gaps. We will have no law.
Why can't we just replace one for the other?
Well, this would be a massive task. We would have to legislate in huge dimensions. That would be massive. It would take up the civil service for years and years, and we would need to employ lots of lawyers at great expense.
Well, let me bring in the former Cabinet Secretary, Lord Gus O'Donnell. We know now that there has been this unit set up under Oliver Letwin. If you were still sitting there as at the top of the civil servant, would you relish this job or fear it?
Oh, it's a wonderful job. I mean, this is what the civil service do, dealing with crises. It's a complicated world. They've done this before, global financial crisis, post-Black Wednesday, all of this.
But not on this scale, surely.
No, as was pointed out, this is a constitutionally incredibly difficult. This is years, right? But I should be clear, this is a civil service unit. Oliver Letwin is going to be dealing with the external part. And those civil servants will be working on contingencies. The problem they've got is we haven't got what leave constitutes. We don't know what leave's all about. We know that everyone would like to have access to the single market. We'd like to have more control for the UK Parliament. We'd like to have control over migration numbers. So how can you achieve those things which are very, very difficult?
We are not going to know that political direction for at least months.
Yes.
There is presumably work they can get on with to say, well, if it's this or if it's that.
Absolutely. And I think what they'll be saying is, can we achieve the things that when people voted leave, they were talking about getting back control for the UK Parliament. So we should think about what kind of debate should we have in Parliament before we trigger Article 50. I think we need to think very carefully about that. So Parliament needs to have a big role in all of this.
But those are the sort of debates that could go on for months.
This is a process that will take some time. There's no question about that, but it's fundamental to our future. And also, it's not just the UK Parliament that needs to think about reform. I think the EU itself, they've got a problem. The euro area needs to integrate further politically, but those outside the euro, there's an opportunity there for there to be a group that that aren't members of Schengen, that aren't members of the euro and don't want to be, that can actually create a future, a bit like the European Economic Area, where we get the great advantages of free trade without necessarily having to have all of the other things which we clearly don't want as much.
Can you see a route through to something that satisfies the levers, restrictions on free movement, but still part of something approximating the single market?
That's what I would want to go for. I would see a world where we get what's really important. The people that voted leave don't want the economic costs if we can avoid them. They do want, as it were, Parliament to have a bigger say. They do want us to have more say over migration numbers. Actually, migration is a problem for the whole of Europe. So I think there are ways, if we can get reform from the EU side, them thinking about how they solve these problems. If this works, one can imagine a situation where a new Prime Minister might be faced with rather different options than David Cameron has faced.
Does that make a general election, in your view, essential?
Well, if we get to a situation where a new Prime Minister, taking account of all the reasons that people voted to leave, and they are absolutely crucial, can actually come back with a really good deal, then you can imagine a situation where, as Jeremy Hunt was saying, you get to a situation where they want to put that to a general election or to a second referendum. It's possible, but I think...
But what if the people vote no?
Then it will be absolutely clear that it wasn't, the things that had been negotiated weren't good enough. And it's just that people say, actually, it isn't about those things you said. It's just, I just don't want to be part of this EU. Thank you very much.
Lord Gus O'Donnell. Professor Sionaidh Douglas-Scott, thank you.
It is 5